Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving deep into the origins of the Chinese Communist Party and the rise of Mao Zedong. It's a story filled with unexpected turns, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
And some fascinating insights, I think, that listeners might be surprised to learn just how much this period in history still shapes the world that we live in today.
It's a story that challenges a lot of assumptions. Starting with Mao himself, we tend to think of him as this champion of the peasant class, but his journey to revolutionary leadership is anything but straightforward.
Yeah. Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. Our sources reveal that Mao Zedong, he wasn't born into poverty, as you might assume.
Right.
He was actually the son of a wealthy grain merchant, born in 1893 in the Hunan province.
And that's where it gets interesting. His upbringing allowed him to receive a university education, something that was quite rare at the time. He even landed a job as a librarian at Beijing University.
Okay, wait, a librarian. How does a son of a wealthy merchant, surrounded by books, end up leading a communist revolution?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It was at Beijing University that Mao first encountered Marxist ideology. He joined a study group, got involved in the May 4th protests, and his path towards revolution, well, it began to take shape.
Wow.
It's a powerful example of how personal experiences can intersect with larger historical forces in unexpected ways.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've got this unlikely revolutionary figure emerging. How did the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP itself, come into being?
The CCP emerged in 1921 with some crucial help from the Comintern.
Okay, the Comintern. Now, for those who might not know, what is that?
The Comintern, or the Communist International. It was an organization based in Moscow dedicated to promoting world revolution.
Ah, okay. So essentially, the CCP had a big brother in Moscow backing them up.
Exactly. However, the early years of the CCP were marked by some very intense challenges. Particularly after the GMD, the Nationalist Party, led by Chiang Kai-shek, turned against them in 1927.
This persecution forced the CCP to make a very dramatic retreat known as the Long March, right?
Yes, the Long March, one of the most legendary and harrowing episodes in the history of the CCP. Imagine 80,000 people setting out on foot on a journey of over 6,000 miles.
Whoa. Over 6,000 miles.
Fleeing the GMD and trying to establish a new base in the remote region of Yan'an.
Wow, 6,000 miles on foot. That's like walking across the entire United States. What was the outcome of this incredible journey?
It was a brutal test of endurance, a real testament to the CCP's resilience. Tragically, only about 5,000 out of those 80,000 actually reached Yan'an.
Wow. It's during this crucible that Mao's leadership truly begins to take shape. But even within the CCP, I imagine there were disagreements about the way forward, right?
You're absolutely right. There was significant tension between those who wanted to strictly follow the Comintern's directives from Moscow and those who believed in adapting Marxism to the unique circumstances of China.
And I bet the Long March itself played a significant role in shaping this debate.
It did. The CCP's expulsion from the cities and their reliance on rural peasant support played right into Mao's strengths. He was a master of mobilizing the peasantry, and he increasingly saw the Chinese Revolution as a peasant-led movement, rather than a purely urban proletariat uprising as traditional Marxist theory suggested.
So while some in the CCP wanted to stick to the Soviet playbook, Mao was starting to write his own.
That's a great way to put it. And this divergence of views would have a profound impact on the future of the CCP and China itself.
So how did Mao, amidst all this internal debate and the hardships of the Long March, manage to solidify his power within the CCP?
It was a combination of strategic brilliance, political maneuvering, and a bit of ruthlessness, I'd say. One of the key turning points was the Zunyi Conference in 1935, held during the Long March. It was here that Mao's leadership was formally recognized, and he began to assert greater control over the party's direction.
So the Long March wasn't just a physical test, it was a political turning point for the CCP and for Mao himself.
Precisely. And this turning point would have far-reaching consequences not only for the outcome of the Chinese Revolution, but for the entire trajectory of the 20th century.
Okay, this is where things start to get a bit darker, right?
Yeah.
We've got Mao consolidating power. What about those who disagreed with him?
Well, this is where we enter the period of the Yan'an Rectification Campaign, which began in 1942. This was a period of intense ideological purification within the CCP, orchestrated by Mao.
So not exactly a time for open debate and free exchange of ideas.
Not quite. Mao used a variety of tactics to purge dissenters and enforce ideological conformity. One of the most notorious was the use of struggle sessions.
What exactly were struggle sessions?
These were public meetings where individuals accused of holding incorrect political views were subjected to intense criticism, humiliation, and often physical abuse. It was a way to silence opposition and instill fear within the ranks of the CCP.
So basically, you either towed the party line or you faced the consequences.
That was the message loud and clear. And these struggle sessions were just one aspect of the broader Yan'an rectification campaign, which also involved intense study sessions focused primarily on Mao's own writings.
So it was about indoctrination as much as it was about purging dissent.
Exactly. By the end of the Yan'an rectification campaign, Mao Zedong's thought had become the CCP's official ideology, formally enshrined in the 1945 party constitution. And this is where we really start to see the emergence of the cult of personality surrounding Mao.
It's fascinating and a bit disturbing to see how quickly this shift towards unquestioning loyalty to Mao took place. What were some of the key elements that contributed to the rise of his personality cult?
It was a multifaceted process, but one of the most striking aspects was the rewriting of history. The Long March, for example, was transformed into a triumphant narrative of Mao's genius and the CCP's unwavering commitment to the people, downplaying the immense human cost and strategic blunders that occurred along the way.
So it's like they were crafting a heroic myth around Mao and the CCP, shaping public perception to legitimize their power.
Precisely. And this manipulation of information was aided by the skillful use of propaganda. Portraits of Mao began to appear everywhere, often depicting him bathed in sunlight, symbolizing his wisdom and divine guidance.
It was all part of creating an aura of infallibility and unquestioned authority around him. It's a classic tactic used by authoritarian leaders throughout history. Create a larger-than-life image, control the narrative, silence any dissenting voices.
And it's a tactic that would have devastating consequences for China in the decades to come.
This deep dive is already so revealing. We've only scratched the surface of Mao Zedong's rise and the evolution of the CCP. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part. I'm eager to delve deeper into the ideology that shaped their policies and actions.
And that's exactly what we'll do in the next part of our deep dive. We'll unpack the key tenets of Mao Zedong thought, explore its impact on the CCP's policies, and examine how this ideology shaped the course of Chinese history.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into the origins of the CCP and the rise of Mao Zedong. It's mind-blowing to think about how this son of a wealthy merchant embraced Marxist ideology and led a revolution in a predominantly agrarian society.
It really highlights how ideas can transcend social boundaries, doesn't it? But what's even more fascinating is how Mao didn't just adopt these ideas, he adapted them to fit the Chinese context. That's what made him so effective. He understood that simply copying the Soviet model wouldn't work in China.
So he took the core principles of Marxism and molded them into something distinctly Chinese. Can you unpack that for us a little bit? What are some of the key tenets of this Mao Zedong thought?
Mao Zedong thought is a complex and evolving ideology, but some core principles emerge. One of the most prominent is the concept of national self-reliance. Mao believed that China needed to break free from foreign control and influence and chart its own course. This idea would become a cornerstone of the CCP's policies for decades to come.
This idea of self-reliance resonates even today, right? You see it in China's pursuit of economic and technological independence.
Exactly. It's a powerful idea that has deep roots in Chinese history and culture. Another key tenet of Mao Zedong thought is the concept of continuing revolution. Mao believed that revolution wasn't a one-time event, but an ongoing process. He argued that even after achieving victory, there would always be forces both internal and external seeking to undermine the socialist state.
So there's this constant sense of struggle, of never letting your guard down.
That's a key part of Mao's thinking. He believed that complacency was the enemy of revolution. He argued that each generation needed to actively engage in revolutionary struggle to prevent counter-revolution and maintain the purity of the communist ideal.
But wouldn't that create a society that's constantly on edge, always looking for enemies real or imagined?
It did. And this is where some of the darker aspects of Mao Zedong thought come into play. The concept of continuing revolution, coupled with the emphasis on class struggle, created a climate of fear and suspicion, where people were encouraged to report on each other and constantly be on the lookout for signs of counter-revolutionary thought.
It sounds like a recipe for paranoia and social control. How did this play out in practice?
Well, one of the ways Mao tried to balance the need for a strong, centralized party with the idea of maintaining a connection with the masses was through the concept of learning from the people. I argued that the party should constantly be in touch with the masses, listening to their concerns and adapting policies accordingly.
That sounds good in theory, but wasn't that also a way to control the narrative? To make sure that the people's voice aligned with the party's agenda?
You're hitting on a crucial point. The line between genuine engagement and manipulation can be quite blurry, especially in a system where dissent is often suppressed. And this is where the cult of personality surrounding Mao comes into play. By elevating him to the status of an infallible leader, the CCP could more easily control the flow of information and shape public perception.
It's a reminder that even seemingly positive ideas like learning from the people can be twisted and used for less than noble purposes.
Absolutely. Context is everything. And in the context of Mao's China, where power was increasingly concentrated in the hands of a single party, these ideas could be used to justify a wide range of actions, from mass mobilization campaigns to political purges.
We've been talking a lot about ideology, but let's shift gears a bit and talk about some specific policies. One that comes to mind is the United Front policy, where the CCP and the GMD, their rivals, put aside their differences to fight against Japan. It seems like a brilliant strategy on the surface, but didn't it also create some long-term problems?
The United Front is a fascinating example of how short-term gains can sometimes lead to long-term instability. While it was crucial for resisting the Japanese invasion, it also papered over some fundamental ideological differences between the CCP and the GMD.
So the temporary truce, not a true alliance.
Exactly. And once the Japanese threat subsided, those underlying tensions resurfaced with a vengeance, ultimately leading to the resumption of the Chinese Civil War. The United Front highlights the challenges of navigating complex political landscapes, where alliances are often fluid and strategic considerations sometimes trump ideological purity.
Speaking of complex political landscapes, let's dive into the social reforms implemented by the CCP in the areas they controlled. Banning arranged marriages, improving literacy rates, and giving women more economic opportunities sound pretty progressive, especially for the 1930s.
They were, and these reforms were strategically important for gaining support among the peasantry. But it's essential to remember that these reforms were implemented within a specific context. The CCP, under Mao's leadership, was not exactly known for its tolerance of dissent or its respect for individual freedoms.
So progress on their terms.
Precisely. It's a reminder that even positive changes can be implemented in ways that restrict individual freedom and enforce conformity. It's a balancing act that societies grapple with to this day.
This deep dive is really driving home the point that history is full of nuances and contradictions. It's not a simple narrative of good guys and bad guys.
That's one of the most important things to remember when studying history. It's about understanding the complexities, the motivations, the decisions, and the often unintended consequences that have shaped the world we live in today.
And speaking of understanding, I think it's time we revisit one of the most pivotal and mythologized moments in the CCP's early history. The Long March. We touched on it earlier, but I think it deserves a deeper exploration.
The Long March is often romanticized as this heroic feat of endurance and resilience. But it's crucial to understand the desperation and brutality that characterized this epic journey. It wasn't a triumphant march toward victory, but a desperate flight for survival.
From what we've read, it sounds like a truly harrowing experience.
It was. Imagine this. 80,000 people setting out on foot, pursued by the GMD, facing constant attacks, starvation, disease, and treacherous terrain. Only 5,000 made it to Yan'an. That's a staggering loss of life.
It's hard to even fathom the hardship and suffering those people endured. It's amazing that anyone survived at all. But it's during this crucible that Mao's leadership really comes to the forefront, right?
Absolutely. The Long March solidified Mao's status as a legendary figure within the CCP. It was a testament to his strategic thinking, his ability to inspire his followers, and his sheer determination to survive.
But it also revealed his willingness to sacrifice countless lives to achieve his goals.
That's an important point to consider. The Long March wasn't just a physical journey, it was a psychological and ideological one as well. It forged a new generation of CCP leaders hardened by hardship and fiercely loyal to Mao.
It's like the Long March reshaped the CCP both physically and ideologically. And from this crucible, Mao emerged as the undisputed leader, setting the stage for the CCP's eventual triumph in 1949.
But before we jump ahead to the CCP's victory, we need to examine another crucial aspect of Mao's rise to power: his personality cult. We touched upon it earlier, but it's a topic that deserves further exploration.
Ah, yes, the carefully crafted image of the infallible leader, the savior of the nation. It's a theme that runs throughout history, isn't it?
It certainly is. And in Mao's case, the seeds of this cult were sown during the Long March and carefully cultivated in the years that followed.
So how did this cult develop? What were the key elements that contributed to its rise?
Well, first and foremost, there was the rewriting of history, as we discussed earlier. The Long March was transformed into a triumphant narrative of Mao's genius and the CCP's unwavering commitment to the people, downplaying the immense human cost and the strategic errors made along the way.
We see this reflected in the propaganda posters and artwork from the era, don't we?
Absolutely. The imagery is incredibly powerful. You see Mao depicted as this larger-than-life figure leading the masses to victory, his face illuminated by the sun, symbolizing his wisdom and divine guidance. It's all very carefully orchestrated.
It's a classic technique, isn't it? Used by authoritarian regimes throughout history to create an aura of invincibility around their leaders.
Exactly. And in Mao's case, it was incredibly effective. The cult of personality surrounding him helped to legitimize his rule, stifle dissent, and create an atmosphere of unquestioning obedience.
It's chilling to think about how the manipulation of information and the creation of these heroic narratives can have such a profound impact on people's beliefs and actions.
It's a stark reminder of the power of propaganda and the importance of critical thinking, especially in times of political upheaval.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from the intricacies of Mao Zedong thought to the harrowing realities of the Long March and the chilling rise of Mao's personality cult. But where do we go from here?
In our final part, we'll delve into the long-term implications of these developments, examining how they paved the way for the CCP's eventual triumph in 1949 and the tumultuous decades that followed.
Stay with us. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on quite a journey, haven't we?
We had it.
Exploring the origins of the Chinese Communist Party and the rise of Mao Zedong. From his unexpected beginnings as the son of a wealthy merchant, to his adaptation of Marxist ideology, the brutal Long March, and the chilling rise of his personality cult, we've uncovered a lot.
It's been fascinating to unpack how these seemingly disparate pieces fit together.
Absolutely, yeah. But as we wrap up our deep dive, the question that keeps coming to mind is, what does it all mean for us today? Why should we care about this chapter in history?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? Because understanding the rise of Mao and the CCP isn't just about looking back. It's about understanding the forces that have shaped the world we live in today.
It's about understanding how a single figure like Mao, with his unique blend of charisma, pragmatism, and ruthlessness, could rise to power and transform a nation.
And recognizing how the seeds of that transformation were sown in those early years. The consolidation of power, the suppression of dissent, the manipulation of information. These patterns didn't just disappear, they had a ripple effect, leading to both remarkable achievements and devastating tragedies in China's future.
It's almost like those early events cast a long shadow, shaping the trajectory of China throughout the 20th century.
Precisely. And by understanding those events, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities of China's current political landscape. Remember those policies we discussed?
Yeah.
Like land reform, the United Front, and social reforms.
Yeah.
They were all aimed at addressing real problems. But the methods used often restricted individual freedoms and enforced conformity.
It seems like a constant tension, this trying to balance progress with individual liberty.
It is, and it's a tension that societies around the world continue to grapple with. So as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought to ponder. We've seen how the cult of personality surrounding Mao contributed to his immense power, and ultimately laid the groundwork for later tragedies, like the Cultural Revolution.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it? To think that something like a personality cult, which can seem so distant and historical, could have such devastating real-world consequences.
It is, and it begs the question, are there parallels in today's world? What can we learn from Mao's rise and the events that unfolded in China to ensure that history doesn't repeat itself?
Those are powerful questions, and ones that deserve careful consideration. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the origins of the Chinese Communist Party and the rise of Mao Zedong. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and a deeper appreciation for the complexities of history.
And remember, history isn't just a collection of names and dates. It's a living narrative that continues to shape our world today.